Hi, I'm Greg Dell with attorneys Dell and Schaefer, and today I'm here with Alex Palamara. And Alex, we've been doing a series of occupational specific videos so that people in specific occupations can learn how their claims specifically will be handled. And today I want to talk to you about podiatrists specifically. I know you've handled claims on behalf of multiple podiatrists and a little bit unique, obviously, because it's a subspecialty within medicine, and some people think it's as simple as just clipping toenails, but it's far more complicated than that, and it's important for your lawyer to also understand that type of occupation because we're the ones who are assisting to either present your claim or help you if your claim's been denied. And a lot of people maybe have never been to a podiatrist, and especially the claims person who's going to handle the claim doesn't really understand what a podiatrist is. So we tend to see that the disability carriers minimize what a podiatrist does. But from this starting point, most podiatrists have what I consider to be private disability policies, not usually governed by ERISA. And what does that mean, and why is that beneficial for a podiatrist who's seeking to get benefits?
Well, to be as clear as possible, when there's a group policy that's typically governed by the ERISA laws, the Employee Retirement Income Security Act, and for lack of a better term, those laws stink. They do not help a person who's filing for disability benefits. They make it very hard kind of to get approved, but if you get denied, it makes it almost impossible to get back on claim, or if you file a lawsuit, the odds are against you of winning that lawsuit because the ERISA laws are so bad. So when someone goes out and buys their own individual policy, typically it's governed by the state law where the policy was issued, and state law typically is more favorable than the ERISA laws. For example, you can have a jury trial. The standard of review that the jury or the judge will give is much different. It's easier to win a lawsuit under an individual disability insurance policy than it is under an ERISA disability insurance policy. Some podiatrists might work for a group and they might be employee of that group, and then they might be covered under a group disability insurance policy that would be covered by ERISA. But many podiatrists have their own individual disability insurance policies, and the law governing them are just more favorable.
So, obviously a lot of podiatrists bought their own policies or got them when they were residents, and that's a great thing. But let's talk about some tips for podiatrists in terms of how to prepare for a claim and what they should expect. So the first thing we always talk about is having the appropriate medical support. Why is that so important?
I mean, the only way you can prove your claim, and when you're the claimant, it's your duty to prove to the insurance company that you're disabled. The insurance company is not going to do their job, it's not their job to prove it to themselves. They have to pay you benefits. It's ultimately your duty to prove your claim, and proof is in the form of medical documentation. So even before you make your claim, you want to have as much medical support as possible. You want to have a history of seeing your physicians, have as much objective documentation or any documentation showing that you're suffering from these conditions or whatever condition you might be suffering from, and maybe there's a progression of your condition, and have that paperwork ready on hand when you file your application. So when you file your application, you have a whole stack of medical records that you can give the insurance company. So proof is the first thing you need when applying for benefits.
A lot of doctors, Alex, we find because they're medical professionals, they have a general idea of what's going on with them. They may speak to one of their colleagues who they might have been speaking to for the past year or so, and they're not really documenting what's been going on. Is that going to be a problem for them when they go to file if they don't have any documentation for the past year, but yet they've been seeing a colleague?
100% it will be a problem because it's not what you know, it's what you can prove. And that's in many aspects of life. Clearly, it's in the aspect of the legal realm and disability insurance claims. I can tell you that I'm suffering from A, B, or C, but if I have no medical support showing that, then I have no proof of my claim, and with no proof, you're going to get denied. So certainly, I know many physicians that never even go see doctors for years. They just talk to their colleagues, like you said. Like my father's a physician, probably hasn't been to a doctor since the 80s, But it's not what you know, it's what you can prove. And the only way you can prove your case, the insurance company is not going to take your word for it, especially when you're the claimant. They're going to look at you as being a biased person. You can make all these complaints that you have this condition, you have depression or tremors or whatever it may be. But if you have no medical documentation supporting this, they're just going to deny your claim. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. They will deny it if you don't have proof.
Right. So the first important tip is really make sure that you are getting medical documentation, and that regardless of any relationship you may have with the doctor, that they're really documenting the records well, the same way you would as a podiatrist document for your patients. The second issue that we see, and the second tip I want to provide, is that we often get called by podiatrists who have chronic medical conditions, whether it's their carpal tunnel, whether it's a neck issue, whether it's a back issue, whether it's a shoulder, it can even be a knee issue. And they've been dealing with it for at least a year, 2 years, and they've been working through that condition. And what is the disability carrier going to use to evaluate what the occupational duties are of the podiatrist when it comes time for them to file it? And specifically, Alex, how are they going to look back in time to see what the podiatrist has been doing?
Well, two things. They can look at a few different areas to see what your actual job duties are. You know, they can go to the national economy. Some policies allow them to look at how the Dictionary of Occupational Titles defines what a podiatrist is. It's kind of very general terms. It doesn't really get into the nitty-gritty of what a podiatrist does. You know, like you said earlier in the beginning of this video, some people just view a podiatrist as, you know, touching your feet, maybe clipping toenails, but it goes a lot further than that. You know, podiatrists do perform surgeries. They have a scalpel in their hand, so I mean, if sometimes they have to cut things out or whatnot, and if your doctor's suffering from tremors, you know, and the Dictionary of Occupational Titles just says a sedentary job doesn't really get to the nitty-gritty, but you're a podiatrist about to cut into someone's foot and you have tremors, you don't want that to happen. So they're going to look at various things, but the most important thing is that you need to have a very good description of what your occupation is, what you do on a daily basis. You can look at, you know, give them a list of all your recent surgeries or recent the coding for what you've done over the past 6 months or a year. You got to be as descriptive as possible so the insurance company can't just blandly say you're just a podiatrist, you know, and just give you that bland definition of what a podiatrist does. You really want to get into the nitty-gritty and explain to the insurance company what it is you do on a daily basis. You know, how your back, you know, you use your hands on a daily basis, you use your back on a daily basis. It's not just a sedentary job. It's a pretty physical job when you think about it. And the insurance company has to realize that when you apply for benefits.
So what I want the podiatrist to understand is that if you're someone who's considering applying, they're going to ask for a lot of information. And specifically, they're going to ask for your CPT production reports for not just the last 2 or 3 months. They're going to probably go back a good 2 years. They're going to want them broken down on a monthly basis. They're going to want that because they're going to say that's their understanding as to what you're doing. They're also going to want your financial statements, monthly P&Ls, your tax returns. They may want your patient schedules to see how many patients are coming in on a daily basis. And they take all of this information to try to determine what your actual duties were in your occupation. And it's a good thing to look at. The problem is, Alex, that we see all the time, and especially with podiatrists, is that many podiatrists do surgical procedures, whether it's a bunion procedure, you know, removal of a bunion, whether it's a fusion type procedure, whatever those procedures are that require either outpatient surgery center in the hospital. But that might only be Tuesdays of their week or Tuesdays and Wednesdays. And the disability carrier says, well, look, we see the surgeries, we looked at your codes, and the surgery only comes out to like 20% of your production, and we see that 80% of what you're doing is in the office. And then they try to make the argument when the podiatrist goes, look, I can't do surgery, and there's no way I can survive in my practice by just having people come in for, you know, regular wellness exams or ingrown toenails or, you know, basic routine things that people go to the podiatrist for. And the disability carriers try to skew it because the podiatrist starts to explain to say, look, as soon as I cut out my surgery, I'm done basically as a podiatrist. The other stuff is secondary to me doing surgical evaluations. And while I may have some of my revenue coming from these in-office procedures, the real way that I make my living is by doing these surgical type things. And if I can't do those, I'm not going to be able to do the duties of my occupation. So something that we deal with on a routine basis, and it's really important to analyze those CPT codes and be able to present it in a light most favorable to the podiatrist. And also, we see that all the time in our denials, where they try to say, well, the person wasn't total, we think they're residual. And it's not a fair analysis, and it's kind of a game that the carrier plays with. And certainly we get around that all the time and deal with that on our denials. And we try to prevent that and deal with it up front when we're representing a podiatrist moving forward.
Sometimes you'll see in the, you know, in the physicians or the podiatrists, you know, records, the history of their work, you can actually sometimes see a slowing down of their ability to do surgeries or ability to do office work or whatnot. And that actually goes to show proof that the person is suffering from disabling conditions, that maybe they're progressively getting worse and worse and worse, and that's why they're making a claim now. And one thing that the insurance companies love to do is saying, you've been suffering from this condition for the last 2 years. What's changed? Sometimes things have not changed at all. Sometimes things have remained the same, but the person's been, basically Superman or Superwoman, going through the condition, just suffering through it, and finally enough's enough. And the camel, has the straw that broke the camel's back finally happened. They just can't do it anymore. Or sometimes there has been a scenario where it's progressively gotten a lot worse, and now it's finally they can't do it anymore. Sometimes it's been this bad for the entire time. But either way, there's arguments to get around the insurance company saying you've been suffering this from 2 years. You should still be able to suffer this more. You've been able to work at this fine. Look how much money you're making doing this job. But that's a terrible argument that the insurance companies make, and many denials, and we have arguments to get around that. I just want to point that out.
Well, Alex, the reverse of what you said is that sometimes you see the CPT codes and you see a reduction. However, what happens with a lot of these podiatrists is they're suffering for a year or two or sometimes more with this chronic condition, and they continue to work through it, and they don't suffer a reduction in their CPT codes. And that becomes a problem. That's why planning is so important, because the disability carrier goes, look, we don't doubt your diagnosis. There's no doubt that your MRI said you had herniated disc, and there's no doubt that you had a positive EMG or whatever you had. But for the past 6 months or year, you're working at the same capacity without any reduction. So how are you telling us that this is preventing you from doing the duties of your occupation? And so that's why planning is so important, where we do always encourage our clients that you need to cut back. Or if you have an event where you drop the scalpel like you were talking about, or you drop some kind of other surgical tool, or you get to the point where you feel that you can't properly do the exam because your hands are shaking, or you slipped or did something.
Or you're fearful that you might injure somebody. I mean, that's right. The biggest thing.
So you don't have to wait till you get to that point, but you need to have either an event happens, or you need to start cutting back, because if you continue at the same capacity and you just go cold turkey and you didn't fall and break your leg or something, an event that day, the chances are they're going to deny the claim. So planning and preparing is what I want to stress completely, because that's the key to getting the claim approved. So
I've seen one where people ramp up their work knowing they're going to be making a claim and knowing their income's going to be dropping significantly, that they ramp up their work to make as much money as possible before they finally say, I can't do it anymore. And the insurance companies try to use that against them. I've seen it happen.
And the other thing, just to touch on real briefly, is that there's these business overhead expense policies that a lot of podiatrists have. Most of our podiatrists are solo practices, or maybe there's another 2 or 3 doctors at the most. And the business overhead policies are they're a very interesting scenario, because with the business overhead policy, technically the business needs to keep running. And yet a podiatrist could have leases on x-ray machines. They could have an office lease that's going for another 2 years. And if they technically just shut down the practice, that business overhead policy may not cover them moving forward. So we have a lot of strategies and a lot of experience in dealing with the business overhead expense. And I highly suggest that you speak to us before you do anything, because unfortunately some callers where they've already shut down the practice or they've sold the practice, and they've cost themselves tons of money that they could have got under the policy had they put a plan in place. So I encourage you to check out our website. We have information about all the disability companies. The best thing to do is to search up your company specifically. You'll find articles, you'll find frequently asked questions, you'll find reviews about your company. You'll really start to get educated about this process and what you should expect. Next thing you should do is please contact Alex or myself. We're always going to provide you with a free initial consultation. We're going to let you know immediately how we can help you. We'll let you know right away what the costs are to work with us. No matter where you live in the country, our office is completely paperless. Plus we work through Zoom and Skype, or everything, all the things that you're probably used to now in this COVID-19 world that we're living in, although we've been operating like this for the past 12 years. So this is a continuation of the norm for us. We thank you for considering our law firm, and we'll be here should you need us in the future. Thank you.